Hi, everyone. It's Joe Veneri, the host of Fit Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. Today, I'm joined by Dan Gluck. Dan is a partner at PowerPlant Ventures, a venture capital firm investing in better-for-you, plant-based food companies. In today's episode, we talk about Dan's experience founding Healthwarrior and selling to Pepsi, emerging categories within plant-based foods like dairy, functional ingredients, and personalized nutrition, and why we're still in the early stages of plant-based foods remaking our food system. Let's get into it. Hi, Dan. Welcome to Fit Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Joe. How you doing? Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, excited to chat. And just to kick things off, can you give the listeners a little, quick bio about you and some context about PowerPlant Ventures?
Sure. So, at a very high level, I grew up in Connecticut, went to school in upstate New York, Colgate University. And then from there, I went into the investment management industry, worked on Wall Street for 15 years. And from there, I became scratched the entrepreneurial itch and started a company called Healthwarrior, which was in the consumer food and beverage space. And that ultimately led me then to leveraging the experience I had as an investor on Wall Street, the entrepreneurial experience I gained in building Healthwarrior, and really just the passion that I brought for health and wellness into getting involved in PowerPlant Ventures, where I'm one of the managing partners. And PowerPlant Ventures is a venture fund investing in emerging consumer food, beverage, food service, and food tech companies, all that are plant-based focused.
Yeah, and it's been, getting to know you a little bit in the lead up to this and having a chance to chat. Your experience, you kind of touched on it there, I think is very unique from somebody who's an operator, a founder, an investor, personally subscribes to a healthy lifestyle. You mentioned to me that you typically run the work. How have those things shaped your career path and kind of where you are now and the work you're doing at PowerPlant?
It's actually a really good question. And as I think about that, ultimately my interest in health and wellness has really been influential in shaping my entire life and career, starting all the way back as a kid. Growing up, I played all sports, but then became very focused on tennis and was a very competitive tennis player, which when I was a young kid led to an entrepreneurial job as a racket stringer, which eventually I became the head tennis racket stringer for Yale University's tennis team, two local country clubs. And here I was, being able to make a lot of money, $10 an hour at the age of 13 or so, working from home. And that was my first job. And then my second job, again, these almost sound unrealistic for a kid who is, less than 16 years old, was for 4 summers, I worked at Wimbledon and the French Open. My first job at Wimbledon was spending time over in London for 3 weeks working for HBO. And then I parlayed that into a job at the French Open, working for USA Networks. And I did that through high school and college. And then after college, I ultimately went into finance, and ultimately in some ways that really was shaped by my athletic career, because I think a lot of the characteristics and traits that are required to win on Wall Street are very similar to sports. It's all about teamwork and hard work and resilience. I remember days where I was, weeks that I was working 80, 90 hours a week, sometimes literally sleeping under my desk. And, that's the tenacity that you really needed to succeed as an athlete. And then, did that for 15 years. But as I said, always was interested in sports. I kind of hung up my tennis rackets and got really into endurance sports. And so became a competitive triathlete doing Ironmans, ultra marathons. And over the course of my journey in endurance racing, I read a book called Born to Run. Born to Run, which we talked about, is a New York Times bestseller by Christopher McDougall that talks all about the Tarahumara Indians who live in the Copper Mountains in Mexico, and they're known as the best endurance runners in the world. In the book, they talk about their secret nutritional ingredient of being chia seeds that they would consume on these long 100-mile endurance runs. And I was intrigued, given I was training for an Ironman at the time, and started consuming chia seeds myself. Realized that there was a genuine health benefit. Also started diving into the research and the history of chia seeds that date all the way back to the Aztec warriors. If you actually Google chia seeds and Aztecs, you'll see all these amazing images of these warriors, and they would carry these chia seeds just in a pouch, and then they would add some water with them and consume them. And so ultimately, that led me to starting Healthwarrior, which, Healthwarrior, we were one of the first companies to bring chia seeds to the market. When I launched the company, you would walk into Whole Foods and they weren't even selling chia seeds. And then pretty quickly, it became one of the fastest growing health foods in the entire U.S. market. And so we built this company, Healthwarrior, and ultimately scaled it and sold it to Pepsi. And from there, I then leveraged the experience I had as a investor and an entrepreneur and this passion for health and wellness, and got involved in PowerPlant. So health and wellness and fitness has really just been weaved through my entire career.
Yeah, likewise. I agree so much with a lot of the things that you're saying in terms of, personally for me, athletics, high school and college football, and then endurance sports as well, have really shaped my character, my personality, just how I think about things, and certainly what now that has become in terms of an entrepreneur and starting and running a company. So we're totally aligned there, and give you credit for continuing to live that lifestyle, especially given that the types of companies you're working with, you can very easily, sit down and talk to them in terms of the perspective, the experience, the value that you're going to add as someone who's done it and also lives that lifestyle, is probably something that, gives you upside in different deals when you're talking with folks.
Yeah, no, I think it's all about, walking the talk, so to speak, which ultimately is, to do what one said one could do or would do, and that really is not making empty promises. So I think, that's really important. It's something that I pride myself on. I think it leads to authenticity, which ultimately leads to trust. And, I'm somewhat of a no bullshit type guy. And I think that really is important for me. But this whole concept also of, walking the talk or walking the walk, however you want to say it, I think is really also important because to me, it leads I think it leads people to excel at whatever they're doing. I fully subscribe to the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour rule, which, really talks about deliberate practice being needed to become world class in any field. So I know when psychologists talk about what does deliberate practice means, it means that they're practicing in a way that pushes your skill set as much as possible. And that's something that I fully subscribe to. I've read Malcolm Gladwell's book. Cal Newport, his book, Deep Work, talks also about cultivating a deep work ethic, which produces massive benefits. Angela Duckworth, the author of the book Grit, she came up with this amazing equation that talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. And then my take on that is, on top of that, I think ultimately achievement leads to fulfillment and enjoyment. So I love that feedback loop, and I think that's really something that I subscribe to.
Yeah, agreed on all parts there. Kind of digging into one thing that you mentioned, talking about the Healthwarrior experience, and finding chia seeds, and then eventually scaling and selling that company. Can you just talk about what was the perception of maybe plant-based foods, the entire plant-based category? And you mentioned going into Whole Foods and not even seeing chia seeds at that point. So how was it that you were able to kind of win people over, convince them that this was a thing? Was it challenging then? And maybe how does that compare to the landscape now?
Yeah, I think ultimately the category in the food sector has changed immensely just in the last couple of years or so since I got involved in the natural food space. And in particular, we're really just seeing the plant-based movement kick up dramatically. What we're really seeing, and I'm seeing, is that we're beginning to see all stakeholders buy into this movement. And I think we're really at the early innings. If you consider the fact, that consumers are buying in, we're seeing a 6 times increase in people identifying themselves as plant-based. Some studies have shown that nearly 75% of people are at least familiar with plant-based diets, but then over half of them are actually interested and or trying it. And we've also seen, popular movies like Game Changers. I don't know if I think we talked about that, the documentary by James Cameron and several professional athletes. I think that movie talking all about sort of all the professional athletes that are moving towards a plant-based diet has picked up a lot of viewers and attention and press. And it's amazing how many friends of mine have really begun to adopt more of a plant-based lifestyle. And then on top of the consumers, we're also then beginning to see buy-in from entrepreneurs. And it's really more important to me, it's not just the quantity of entrepreneurs we're seeing move into this plant-based space, but the quality. Historically, you would see some of the top universities churning out graduates of their business schools or undergrad schools going into finance and consulting, technology. But now we're beginning to see a lot of these amazingly talented students go into the food sector, particularly in the plant-based, because there's just so much innovation happening right now. So the quality of entrepreneurs really is just beginning to blow my mind. When I started Healthwarrior almost 7 years ago, there's a huge, the largest natural food expo called Expo West occurs every year in Anaheim. And not to sound like I'm suffering from hubris, but when my co-founders and I went there, we kind of we're like, if we can't win, we're doing something wrong. And that's because if you look back to sort of a lot of the original founders, you get a lot of sort of just more mission-driven hippy-dippy types that were starting all these raw food companies and healthy food companies that didn't really have much business experience. Not to say that they're not smart, but they didn't necessarily typically come from a business mindset. And I think now we're beginning to really see the quality of entrepreneurs combine that passion and genuine interest in their mission, but with the business acumen. And then also the last three sort of stakeholders that are buying in that are really important in this entire movement are the corporates. We're seeing a ton of M&A activity. We're seeing companies like Danone and Nestle acquiring these plant-based companies. Both of those companies, in fact, which Danone is traditionally, is predominantly a dairy company. Nestle has its roots in dairy as well. Publicly have stated that plant-based diet is one of the biggest trends of this generation, and that they're moving their portfolios towards more plant-based food products. That's really important. Nestle is a $100 billion annual revenue company, and they're beginning to shift their entire portfolio towards plant-based. Not entirely, but they're talking about it publicly of how they're moving more there. And then the last two are investors. We're seeing tons of investment dollars flow into this category and sector, from dedicated funds just like PowerPlant Ventures to tech funds like Kleiner Perkins, which historically wasn't necessarily interested in food, but they were also with us, one of the biggest investors in Beyond Meat. And then even successful entrepreneurs like Richard Branson and Bill Gates, they're all talking about the future of plant-based eating. So that's also very telling. And then last, we're even seeing governments getting involved. China several years ago talked about trying to cut meat consumption by 50% over the next 2 years. So we think we're really, in the early innings of a major food revolution. And, it's getting a lot easier to build and scale a plant-based food company, or even just a general health, better for you food company, given all of these statistics and trends.
Yeah, it almost seems inevitable at this point, right? That this is the way things are trending. These, not only from, whether it's environmental concerns, health concerns, animal welfare concerns, just what does the food system look like in 3, 5, 10 years, that there's not an option. We have to move in this direction and pursue these options. And one thing that we wrote about recently in one of the Fit Insider newsletters was this idea of product zeitgeist fit, that it's not like there haven't been times in history where, people tried to make the vegan, raw, plant-based burger, other food item. But it's kind of like you mentioned when you went into the expo, it's like something about this wasn't quite right. Whether it was the branding or the operations or how it was being conveyed to the consumer, it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right branding. It wasn't the right person maybe. Whereas now you look at the Beyond Meats and Impossible Foods of the world, you have everybody from Snoop Dogg to professional athletes to Katy Perry, changing that perspective. So the shift has been incredible to watch too.
You're 100% right. And something that I think ultimately led to the success of Beyond Meat is the founder, Ethan Brown. I think one of the most, there's a lot of reasons why Beyond Meat has succeeded, but I think from a branding perspective, one of their best decisions was that they were insistent that they were on the shelf next to traditional animal meat. Versus there's sort of, if you walk into a lot of grocery stores, and it's changing now, there used to be just one little cold case, refrigerator of all the vegan plant-based food products. And he said, I do not want to be in that category. And so if you look at it from sort of a branding perspective, the company brilliantly positioned themselves as a brand that was competitive with just traditional animal meat. And I think that made all the difference.
Right. And so as this shift is happening, can we look at it through the lens of, PowerPlant? What was, obviously the kind of thesis and belief is in the alternatives and plant-based foods, but how did that come together? When did it solidify in terms of, in relation to now it seems mainstream and everybody's talking about it, and even, as you mentioned, billion-dollar companies are making this shift. But kind of what was that like at PowerPlant, identifying the opportunity and then working to, have a hand in some of these investments?
Yeah. So, maybe just stepping back a little, talking about the history of PowerPlant Ventures. The firm, we were founded in 2015, and I was actually not part of the founding team. I stepped in a little after we got off the ground to join as the fourth partner. But ultimately, I mentioned my background as a founder in the plant-based healthy food sector, but my other three partners all also have come from a similar background. So my partners, Kevin Boylan and TK Pillen, are the founders of Veggie Grill, which Veggie Grill is a plant-based fast casual restaurant chain with nearly 40 locations, predominantly on the West Coast, but they've also now grown on the East Coast as well, opening up locations in Chicago, Boston, and also just recently opening up a flagship restaurant in New York City. And so they've been at that for many years, building out that, and had tremendous success so far with that. And my other partner, Mark Rampolla, was the founder of a very well-known household brand today called Zico Coconut Water. And Mark's story is very similar to mine. In fact, the reason I got connected with Mark and PowerPlant is because I was one of Mark's early seed investors when he started Zico, prior to me even getting Healthwarrior off the ground. In fact, that was one of the inspirations for me and learnings to get to start my company, Healthwarrior. And so Mark was at the time working in sort of quote unquote corporate America, working for International Paper, running a business down in Latin America for them, when he discovered coconut water and realized that was just a household drink that was genuinely healthy, that tasted great. And he recognized the fact that nobody in the US was drinking coconut water. And so he decided to pick up his whole family, move back to the States, and started to build Zico from selling the first case all the way to Coke buying a minority stake in the company, and then eventually buying the entire company in 2013. And so, and Mark, interesting enough, was an investor in Kevin and TK's company, Veggie Grill. So they had a connection. So ultimately, the three of them in 2015 came together to plant the seeds for PowerPlant Ventures. Mark had sold Zico. Kevin and TK had stepped aside as co-CEOs and became co-chairman of Veggie Grill because they raised a big private equity round and decided to bring in a more seasoned management team. And that's really how we got off the ground. And so we launched a first fund in 2016, started investing in some of the best emerging plant-based food companies because we were on the ground floor as founders seeing all these amazing companies. At Veggie Grill, in fact, they got to know Ethan Brown, the founder of Beyond Meat, when the company was a pre-revenue company. And Veggie Grill was also the first company that had an exclusive on the Beyond Burger when it launched. And so we really had a front row seat into what was happening in the plant-based movement, and thought that we had the background as operators, as founders, as a team, coming from finance as well, that we would be able to ultimately find, fund, and help scale all of these emerging companies.
Yeah, given that experience and the various companies and investments and, network and connections that were made there. Sounds like it's the kind of plant-based dream team. So coming together to work on PowerPlant Ventures makes a ton of sense. And now as you're investing in different companies, can you kind of walk us through how you evaluate different entrepreneurs, companies, emerging verticals? What do those filters look like, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, so good question. And yes, I think ultimately as founders, we have firsthand experience of creating value, which resonates with a lot of entrepreneurs. We can look them in the eyes and say we've been there and done that, and successfully, succeeded building these brands. And we've sort of been involved. We were involved in all parts of the value creation stage, from identifying a better for you opportunity, to architecting a breakthrough brand, to leading early stage growth, scaling it, executing on a growth plan, and then ultimately exiting. And in the case of both Zico and Healthwarrior, to Coke and Pepsi, respectively. And so we've incorporated our experience into our entire value creation playbook and how we identify these companies. And so what we've learned is it really starts with a unifying vision. That's first and foremost of the 5 sort of key areas that we focus on. That's number one. And it starts with understanding what is the core purpose of the company. We like sitting down with the founder and understanding what their goals are, their missions, what are their, what's their core sort of North Star, so to speak. Then from there, we always think about, are they building a strong team and culture? That's really important to have a visionary and compelling founding team, to get the right team on the bus, and really ensure that there's a top to bottom alignment of the entire culture within the organization, and make sure that it's really a culture of passion, ownership, and for a lot of these early stage companies, what we would describe as a sense of urgency. Thirdly, it really then also comes down to compelling product and brand strategy. Does the company have clear target and consumers' needs, usage occasion, and is it a big total addressable market? Are they meeting or exceeding the rational needs with respect to taste, experience, satiation? Are they also creating and delivering emotional needs, of craving and connection and social impact to the consumer? These are all things that we're analyzing. Fourth, we're always looking for an optimized operating model. We need to ensure that the company is focused on a sales strategy that ultimately delivers real growth. Are they methodical and targeted in their marketing plan, and building the foundation for long-term growth? Do they have disciplined financial controls and processes in place? Are they setting the right KPIs, routines, and improvement plans for the company? These are all things that are critical, because you can have the first 3, but if you don't have the operating model in place, then financially the business is not going to succeed. And ultimately, while we love funding visionary entrepreneurs with a mission, we're uncompromising on our returns. And so we need to ensure that the financial model and the entire operating model makes sense. And then last, we always talk about having aligned partners. Do they have other investors that share their vision? Are they working, do they have great partnerships with suppliers and co-packers and manufacturers that are aligned with the business? That's really something that, we always talk about, and surrounding yourself with the right people who are smarter than you. And we look for founders and teams that are self-aware enough to understand that they need to work with the best people in the entire industry. And so that's sort of at a high level how we think about analyzing and evaluating entrepreneurs and companies.
Yeah, when you're taking some of those filters, looking at some of the investments that you've made, now the different emerging verticals, what is it, or I guess, is there something, whether it's a category, a company, a space that you're looking at and kind of waiting for it to pop or waiting for it to reach the level of maybe the Beyond Meats?
Yeah, that's a good question. We sort of have a few trends at the meta level, the high level, that we're very focused on. And then we also have some categories where we're spending a lot of time on. So maybe I can sort of talk about at sort of a macro level, beyond the plant-based focus, a few themes and trends in the marketplace that we think will continue to drive consumer demand are one, the whole concept of fresh and convenient. Ultimately, we think that consumers are seeking fresher and healthier options, but also at the convenience of packaged food. And so while it sounds very simple, it's actually not as easy to put unprocessed food on the shelves for consumers to buy in traditional brick and mortar retail or even in online business. But that's something that we're moving more and more towards. A lot of the packaged food is highly processed, which is what we're trying to avoid investing in. And we think that the consumer is moving in that direction. So that's number one. Number two is the whole concept around food with functionality. I think ultimately, as consumers are increasingly interested in health and wellness, they increasingly also want more out of what they eat and drink. And so that's really something that we're focused on, and we're beginning to find, companies. One of our portfolio companies is called Vibe Organic. They are in the business of manufacturing and selling wellness shots. So everyone is, who's gone to a juice shop has walked in and sort of on an impulse bought a wheatgrass shot or a turmeric and ginger shot. They've taken this to commercialize it, and now we're selling across the country in Whole Foods and all the other retailers. And it's all about functionality. Their number one best-selling SKU is an immunity SKU, which has doses of turmeric and ginger and cayenne in it, which I should note right now are flying off the shelves. We're doing this podcast right now amidst all the turmoil of COVID-19. And right now people are looking for that functionality. So people are grabbing this immunity boost off the shelves. A third theme that we're focused on in trend is the concept around personalization. We think that consumers are increasingly expecting a more sophisticated approach to personalization of food. And so that's an area that we're very interested in. And particularly as it relates to personalization, the one hotspot that we're focused on there is around vitamins and supplements. We can get a little into that in a little more detail. And then last is transparency. We think that ultimately people are becoming more interested in where their food comes from. And so that's something that there's a lot of our companies really spend a lot of time sourcing high quality ingredients, understanding where the ingredients are coming from, making them they're all organic. And so that's another area that we're particularly focused on. So those are some of the themes. And then, another area kind of getting to your question also of a category that we think could be like the next Beyond Meat is really in the alternative dairy space. There are a few categories that we think right now are on the cusp of really breaking out. We've seen non-dairy milk sales over the last 10 years skyrocket, and now on a global basis are greater than 10% of traditional milk sales. But when you look at other categories in the dairy space, like cheese and yogurt and ice cream, they're basically below 1%. Yet we're beginning to see them grow significantly. For example, yogurt just last year plant-based yogurt grew 40% year over year versus a negative 3.5% decline for traditional dairy yogurt. And cheese, the same thing. We saw 20% growth rate last year relative to a flat market for traditional cow and goat cheese. So those are two areas that we think are poised to break out. We actually just recently invested in a plant-based yogurt company called The Collaborative. It's a company that's actually based in the UK, but is now expanding here in the US. They're the number one, depending on which sort of retailer, but number one or two best-selling player in the UK and Europe in the plant-based space, have material sales in Europe. And now we're really building an all-star team and business here in the US. So we're excited about that because we think there's just huge runway from a macro perspective to see the penetration increase from less than 1%, to 5-10% over time. And cheese is another category where we're focused on.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch in the dairy space. We did a report recently, kind of talking about the movement towards dairy alternatives. You had Perfect Day, who recently, I think it was in December, they raised like $120 million round to take the route of, hey, we're going to make the proteins from milk to be able to replicate it across the board. So it's an ingredient more than it is like a consumer facing brand. Meanwhile, somebody like Chobani, who's made their name in yogurt, Greek yogurt, saying we're moving away from it. We're moving to plant-based alternatives, and we're basically going to plant that flag now and start progressing in that direction. So it also, on that front, seems inevitable as well.
Yeah, no, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier as far as all stakeholders are buying in. And we're seeing these phenomenal entrepreneurs. We know the team from Perfect Day. We're not investors. It's a little early for us. We typically don't invest in pre-revenue companies, and they're kind of just getting off the ground right now. But a huge opportunity there for Perfect Day. And just talk about a great management team and smart founders. They've been persistent. They've been at it for a couple of years developing this technology and finally ready for commercialization. And then, as you said, there's demand from the corporate side where Chobani and Danone and Nestle are all beginning to play with all these new ingredients. We're investors in a company called Nutriati, which manufactures a chickpea flour and protein. And we're beginning to see huge demand for that from all the small startup emerging brands right up to the largest consumer packaged good companies in the world.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to touch on too, when you think about the size, I mean, Impossible Foods just raised, what was it, a $500 million round, Series E. Obviously, Beyond Meat is public. How are these valuations? How are we justifying the valuations of the companies? I mean, obviously, when you listen to the founders on one side, they're saying we basically want to do away with animal agriculture altogether. When you look back 30 years from now, it'll be unthinkable that we were even, doing what we're doing from a consumption and industrial farming standpoint. And you have even CEOs, I think it was the former CEO of Tyson, who said, if we can make or replicate meat and not have to use the animals, why wouldn't we do it? So again, back to that point about corporate buy-in, but it's speculative, I guess, at this point, the numbers that are attached to the valuations, but kind of how are we getting there and how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I could go on forever. So what I would say is, first off, the global food industry is it's a $5 trillion industry, and it's completely broken. It's unhealthy, it's inefficient, it's unsustainable, it's inhumane, and this is creating a massive economic opportunity. And so when you look at it and step back with sort of a visionary lens of a venture capitalist or an entrepreneur, this is going to be one of the biggest opportunities in the entire economy to capitalize on. If you look at the simple math of Beyond Meat that a lot of investors have done, the meat is a $1 trillion TAM. And if plant-based meat can take 10% market share, which is where, as I talked about, dairy is right now, at least milk is. It's actually, I think, closer to 13%. That results in a $100 billion category within, call it 15 years or 10 years. And if a company like Beyond Meat can take 5% of that share, it puts it at $5 billion in revenue. Today's market cap, obviously, is very volatile, and given that the market declines, it's just short of $4 billion. So you have a company that's right now trading at $4 billion with project potential of a $5 billion revenue run rate in several years or so. That's kind of the back of the envelope math. So depending on, then we get into the nuances of what your time frame is. And look, we're very rational investors. I might get a little too nuanced into sort of our investment thesis, but we're not your traditional venture investor that makes, sort of 20 investments and hopes one of them becomes a 50x return. We really try to underwrite investments with rational assumptions, go in with rational multiples, rational exit multiples. And so there are a lot of companies, particularly really in the early stage, pre-revenue or maybe generating a couple $1 million of sales, that there's so much investor excitement around the macro opportunity that I think that, there's not, I know there's a sacrifice of short-term return, because a lot of these valuations candidly just do not make sense. It's great that there's investors that are willing to make those big bets. It's great that there are impact investors that are willing to fund this R&D. But I think over time, I think some of those valuations will probably come a little more back to earth, and investors will be able to make a more competitive return on some of these deals. And so we've taken a bit, more of a conservative approach when we underwrite these things. And, we did get involved in Beyond Meat and companies like Thrive Market, which right now is one of the biggest online grocery retailers out there, Ripple Foods. And so, as I said, we're not afraid to put money to work in some of these high flyers, but we have a very disciplined approach. And we've just seen some companies out there that we don't think are ready for that type of capital, that are ready to sort of live, to grow into the valuations they're getting. So we'll see what happens. And I think, again, we'll see if this is a blip or not, but with a 30% pullback in the S&P and the NASDAQ just in the last 2 weeks, I think we're getting a little sort of view of what valuations might look like, going down the road. But I don't want my my comments on valuations to take away from the fact that we are just still so bullish, and we believe in the macro thesis. But if you really want to get nuanced, as an investor, you still have to be cognizant of short-term valuations and what you're trading off for long-term gains.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all the factors that, again, back to the timing of us recording this, the unknowns and some of those things that will fluctuate, but I think sticking to the thesis and also recognizing it's early. It's very early. Although it seems like, the plant-based movement is now going mainstream, it's still very early in terms of what's to come. Zooming out, I wanted to change gears a little bit, and something I wanted to get your take on, given, that you kind of personally live a healthy, active lifestyle, and, as that relates to the audience and listeners that we have who are entrepreneurs, executives, investors in the space as well. Just how are you thinking about the broader, whether it's fitness studios, connected equipment at home, the Pelotons of the world, fitness and wellness, and just what are you interested in? What are you excited about as it relates to that category?
Yeah, well, I think studio and group fitness is going to continue to grow. I'd say secretly, I always wanted to own my own gym. By transitive properties, I ended up doing so by getting married. My wife owned 4 Pilates studios in New York City. So while I couldn't own them myself, somehow I ended up marrying a woman who owns gyms. But I honestly think that's going to just continue to be a growing industry. I will say that at some point in my life, I will own and bring to market my own concept. I've had an idea for years that I wanted to bring to market. I think the market's ready for it, but I'm pretty busy running PowerPlant Ventures right now, so might have to take a pause. But I'm very bullish on the growth of that. Obviously, it's getting more crowded, just like the consumer food space. There's been a lot of big winners like Peloton and like SoulCycle. My wife had a very successful business that she sold in the Pilates space. But I think there's always place for better concepts, better businesses. And so I continue to love that. Personalization of food through wearables, I think is definitely something that will grow. This whole concept of the quantified self, where new technologies are making it easier to track our health and bodies, as well as, channels by which companies can gather and analyze consumer data and preferences. So, you look at, companies obviously like the Apple Watch, which can track your sleep and your pulse, and then Oura rings. And now it's amazing how many of my friends are walking around with blood glucose monitors. So I think personalization of food through wearables will be something that will grow. And then also just this whole concept around democratization of medical testing. We're beginning to see the ability to do genetic testing, blood analysis, fecal testing in your own home. And I think over time, and it's still very nascent, but over time, I think a lot of these new at-home testing services will give consumers, greater visibility into their genetics and their DNA, and be able to understand how their health is uniquely affected and what actions they can take. So those are all sort of, some bigger picture, long-term trends that I'm bullish on.
Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff. Definitely do keep me posted on that fitness concept when you're ready to bring it to market. There's,
I need a partner to help run it.
Listen, I might know some folks. So there's,
yeah, exactly.
I agree.
So let's talk.
Yeah, I agree. There's a ton of opportunity in that space that will continue to grow. And, something that we've seen and tracked is just the emergence of the digital health, at-home testing, the Aura. I've had Will Ahmed from Whoop on the podcast and continued to keep up with him with what they're doing. So yeah, it seems like, again, just getting started in terms of what that impact will be.
Very exciting.
Yeah, and then we'll wrap it up and get you out of here on this. Just what's next for PowerPlant Ventures, and also where can people learn more, both in terms of what you're working on, the companies you've invested in, and all of that?
The sky's the limit for PowerPlant Ventures. We're currently investing out of our second fund, which was a $165 million fund, making some amazing investments, and we're going to continue to raise more funds and invest in the best in class of entrepreneurs, and continue to fund all the healthy innovation that's happening in our space. And you can learn about us at www.powerplantvc.com.
Awesome. Well, Dan, listen, I appreciate you making time. I'm really excited to share today's conversation. I think there's a ton of valuable insights, and just grateful for you, carving out some time in your schedule to chat.
I appreciate it, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. For more from Fit Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.